Okay, now we'll be making our final major objects for the scene, and what we're going to be making are snow-covered trees. Now, one of the disadvantages of the method we're going to be using is the fact that we really won't be able to use solid growth technology, which is a really neat feature, but we are going to have to stick with a couple of main objects and sort of clone them with the ecosystem. So we're going to go ahead and add a tree here. Just right mouse click on the tree icon, and that'll allow us to load what's available. And I'm going to be using the fir tree, and click OK. I'm going to go ahead and just zoom in so we can get a better look at the tree, because we want to be selecting a tree that's going to look good when it's cloned several thousand times, and we don't have to worry about any major pieces of it sticking out that will make it far too unique and will be obvious that it's the same tree over and over. Of course, we are going to be making a couple of different trees so that it does add some variation and we're not all stuck with the same thing. Now, I'm pretty much going to leave this tree where it's at, but if you wanted to select a new tree, you could come up here, double-clicking on the plant, which will bring up our plant editor, and selecting new plant, and that will go pretty much through your solid growth, which will allow you to create variations, and I'll just go ahead and do that. And by clicking on it, we can create different types of trees that we might want. I'm just going through and looking for the right one, and something that's going to look good. And I'll just stick with this one right here. Just after a couple of clicks, that one came up. Now what I want to do is actually, I'm going to adjust the width of our leaves. So make sure we're on the right side under leaves. I'm just going to bring in our width a little, and that's because we're going to be using another tree to add snow, and we don't want this tree to be too thick. So I'm just going to bring it down just a little and then click OK. And now what I'm going to do is create the snow portion, because we are going to have to use separate objects for the snow. Otherwise we'll have a tree that's entirely covered in snow and just a white tree, and then that won't look very good. So we do need some green parts in there to make it look a lot more realistic. So I'm going to hit Control C and Control V, and that's going to copy this tree and paste it. I'm going to go back to our 4 views just by double clicking on our top bar up there and zoom in to our front view. And now what I want to do is now we have our clone selected still, and if not, you can come over to on the side over here and just select from the different trees. I'm going to select that bottom one, which is going to be the clone, and I'm just going to pull that up just a tiny bit. It doesn't have to be raised up too much. And then what I also want to do is rotate that slightly. So we're going to click into the top view, and still making sure we have that second fir tree selected. We're going to grab our little rotation handle over here, the right one, and just rotate our tree so we're filling in some gaps. And you want to make sure you do it so it doesn't look like it's just offset a little. So in other words, you want to go more than at least 20% of rotation in order to get a good looking effect. We'll just zoom in here. And you can see in our preview here we have a pretty nice looking tree so far. There is one extra thing. If you notice, though, we have these tall kind of stems sticking out of the top, and we are going to have to remove one of them. I guess you don't have to, but that makes it kind of obvious that it's 2 trees put together. So we can remove that with a boolean, but first we're going to make our snow covered part of this tree. So I'm going to go ahead and double click, making sure that our second fir tree is still selected, and under leaves where it says fir tree branch, we're going to click on this little leaf down here in the bottom. I'm just going to pull up some more options here, and then we can double click on color picture and load in something else if we wanted to. We could load in whatever color we wanted to make with a bitmap. if you want to actually change your leaves to some different colors, or you could load in just a white background, which might work. You could do the alpha is the main sort of focus here, because the alpha is going to be cutting out our leaf, and also our bump is important, but the bump is not linked to our color picture. So therefore, if we change the color picture to white, we shouldn't have a problem. We can also go and double click, which will bring us directly to our material editor, which might be a little bit easier to do. So if we go to overall color and click on that and bring it up to white and click OK, and then OK again and close that out, you'll notice that we have a nice little snow-covered tree. And depending on the rotation really depends on the placement of the amounts of snow. But I think this looks pretty good because now we have patches of green in there and a nice overall white. What we can also do is go back into our plan editor just by double clicking and raise our width back up. And that way we get more snow than we have green areas. Since we have a blizzard scene, that would be pretty much ideal. But also you notice we're getting kind of a blue tint to the color of the plant leaves. So I'm going to go back in here and double click into our material editor. And there is kind of a bug right now. So if we go to overall color and double click, you'll see that our RGB values, the red, green, and blue, should be at 255, 255, 255 because it's white. But instead we have 247, 255, and 255. So if I pull that back up to 255 all the way across for RGB and click OK, it does change to white. And then I close that out. But what happens is it's still going to bring that down a little bit, and now we still have that sort of blue tint. So we're not getting an ideal white. So we're actually going to have to change that just a little, because it is kind of a bug right now. So if I click back in there, we're still down to 247. No matter what changes we made, that's still taking effect. So if I'm going to do it one more time just to show you, you can see that we still have those blue flecks. So we'll double click on here, and what we're going to do now is go into our function editor and make our change. So I'm going to right mouse click, go to edit function under map picture, and this is going to bring up our whole surface for our leaves. And we're pretty much going to leave the transparency and bump alone, and we're just going to select our color. And with our color, we want to change this to a color node. Click add color node, or actually delete the section here. We can delete our UV coordinates as well. And we're going to double click on our color map now. And we can just select solid color white. Click OK and OK. And now if you notice, that completely fixed our problem. And we no longer have that blue tint in there. So now we don't have to worry about that little bug that's in there. So all we have to do is just go into the function editor and change it. So it's a very simple way to correct that slight little bug that there happens to be in the software right now. And hopefully soon that will be fixed. Okay, there's another thing too you might want to add, and that is different bits of specularity and things like that to the actual leaves. We'll scroll through with our second fir tree selected, and we can go up here and just go through these arrows and double click to get directly to our surface, which is a much quicker way. And if we go to effects, we can adjust our diffuse and our ambient, bring our ambient down if we wanted to. You could even up your luminosity or the contrast to get different types of effects. And we can go to reflections. We can add a little bit of reflection in there so it reflects light a little bit better. And then we'll make that a blurred reflection. And you just don't need to bring it in too much, but just a little enough to get a little hint of it. We can bring down our ambient and click OK. And now you see it did kind of tone that down just a bit because that was a very, very bright surface before. And now it still looks like a nice looking snow texture. And what we could do too is even load in a different sky if we want to see what it's going to look like for our scenes. If we go to atmosphere, load atmosphere, and we could select sort of a nice dark sky. A little bit of bad weather. And select rainy Alaska. That's a pretty good one. It'll give us a nice dark sky. And that way we can really see how our tree is going to look in those dark sky areas. Of course, at the final scene, I'll be wanting to use global illumination or global radiosity, which will give us a nice overall effect. But right now, we're just pretty much looking at the tree. We can go in and edit these surfaces later if we need to, and kind of swap out things for the ecosystem. But just want a major basis of how these trees are going to look. So now we want to go in and remove this sort of top stem. And the easiest way to do that is just to create a cylinder. And we are going to scale the cylinder down. Quite small. So it's about the same size, just a little bigger than that stem we're trying to cover up. And I'm going to cover up this sort of straight one. So we just need to move it into position and just take a look in our main camera view, just rotating around just to make sure that we're fully covering up that piece. And now we need to also figure out which tree that's part of, and that's part of that first tree. So what we can do is select our cylinder, hold down the control key, and select that first fir tree, and select Boolean difference. And actually we did it the exact opposite, so I'm going to undo that. And we're supposed to select the fir tree first, sorry, and then the cylinder. And then we select Boolean difference. And that has removed our extra stem we had right there. And you can go in and even deeper if you wanted to, because you can still see sort of flecks of it, but it should be alright. You can go ahead too and select that fir tree, that first bit there. And you can make the width a little bit bigger if you wanted to, so a little more green showing. And you've got a lot of options to really go in and define this tree the way you want to, and to have some nice full coverage. So that looks pretty good. And now what I want to do is actually go ahead and group this. Undo. Make sure we select fir tree and our difference, and we're going to go to group objects. And now we have a group. So our tree is now technically one object, and we can go ahead and save this group now. So if we go to File and Save Object, it will allow us to save any objects that we make, and we just call this tree snow and save. And then we get a nice little preview picture here. We'll just let that render just a little bit and refine so that we get this in the preview, because what this little preview picture is for is when you go to open a file or load in an object, these little pictures will show up to give you an idea of what it looks like. So it's a quick little render that shows you exactly what it looks like. And you can adjust the use global illumination if you wanted to, or turn on or turn off the local light. You could also change the background type, whether you want it uniform or checkered, and then you can also change your ground color. But we're going to stick pretty much with all the same settings because our previews aren't really that important. Click OK. So now what we can do is actually adjust and start making variations of trees. Doing pretty much the same method we did before, but we can also alter our existing trees to make them a little bit different. We'll select our fir tree here, and we're going to adjust the length. So we make it a little bit taller, and also the length of the leaves, so it's a little bit narrower, and then the width as well. And click OK. And now we have a different shaped tree, and we can adjust our other tree, which is defining our green area. We'll adjust the length on there, bring down our length here, and maybe increase the width. And that looks like it's pretty good. We do have that Boolean sort of removing certain parts of it. But it seems to be okay. And for the most part, these trees will not be extremely close to the camera, which is a benefit of using this method, is that won't really show up too much. Although if you do want to change that, you easily could. Because right now, if you notice, we do have some of the white flecks sort of outside of our tree region, and that's because of the size difference. But we could easily just adjust that, and we'll just make it a little bit taller. Click OK, and that should make it look a little bit better, and it does. But just go in, and if you're going to have some close-ups, then you can go in and really set up your tree a little bit differently. In this case, I am going to ungroup and delete our cylinder. And this one will have just two little peaks sticking up here, two little stems, and that should be okay. But what you want to do is just make a couple of tree objects. You can do 2 or 3. You could even just do 1 if you really wanted to. Since it will be a very snow-covered scene, there'll be lots of snow shoving over the camera, and it just might not show up as much. Not to mention, too, with the ecosystem, we're also going to be changing our sizes and things like that. So what you mostly want is just to change the overall shape of it, maybe add a little bit of randomness to it. So we could go in there and select our tree again, double click, and we could change the diameter if we wanted to, make it a little bit thick for the actual stem if we wanted. We could also change the droop and the angle, which is adjusting certain little bits, which is going to make just the tree look different, and that's pretty much the whole idea. So we'll go ahead and select these two, and we still have that group, and we can rename it if we wanted to, just by clicking that area. We can call this tree 02. I can go back and name the other one if you want as well, because that group will be the name for the tree within our scene. So I'm going to save object. I'm going to call this tree snow underscore 02, save, and then we're going to get our preview options again. But I'll go a little more in depth now and kind of show you what you can actually do with this. You can check off the global illumination, which will allow it to render faster, but you won't get as good of a render. You can also turn off your local light, and that'll adjust that. If we change our ground color, we can use any amounts of the different gradients we have in here. We could grab sort of a terrain, green, brown, white right there, and then we get that color ground. So you can go through and really change up your previews if you want, and get some different effects. I'm usually pretty happy with the default settings because, as far as I'm concerned, it's just a preview. And if I know exactly what the object is, that's all that really matters. Unless, of course, you're creating a library of trees, which you could easily do with all different types of trees, and that way you have a much better look at these trees. So I'm going to click OK. And now we have that saved tree. Like I said, we could also do this with other types of trees. If you want to, I'll just go ahead and delete all of that right there. And there's a bunch of other different trees you can use for this. I like to use the fir tree because it gives a nice kind of pine tree look, and it's really good for like a winter scene. But you could also use some of these other trees and even blend maybe a winter pear tree with one of the other trees. Or just using these just to change the leaves so they're covered in snow. But if we want to change branches and things like that, then this would be the best way to do it, because there's not really going to be a whole lot of leaves on any of these trees in the winter, unless it's some sort of freak occurrence. But what you could easily do is, let's just take this winter pear tree here. That doesn't have any leaves on it at all. And we'll just go ahead and edit this just a little. So we're going to Control C, Control V, double click, so we get into our plant editor. And I'm going to adjust our length just a tiny little bit up, so we're going up +2, and click OK. And now I'm going to leave that where it is, and we just want to make sure that we're not too far over our branches, and it looks like we might be. So I'm going to double click, and I'm going to make that 1, and that will bring us down a little bit more. And this is more of a distant effect. We might even be able to do 0.5 and click OK, which will bring us down. And now we want to adjust our surface of this second tree. And we need to adjust the branches and the actual surface. So we'll grab our branches here. We're going to do the same thing we did before. Right mouse click, edit function under color production. And now in this case, our bump is actually linked to our color. So we're going to select color tab and go to add color node. And we just want to disconnect this, pull that off, or we could go ahead and just change our color, because that doesn't technically have to be linked to that, because once we do that, then it's pretty much overwriting anything else we have, and we still ended up with a little bit of a nice bump in there. And now we can go and edit that other texture the same way we just did. Going to edit function, and under color, we have this combiner right here, which is combining our different nodes, and we can actually just delete both of those. Delete our combiner, select color, add the color node, and add white, and click OK. And you could add more to this as well. We still have our bump in here though, so it looks pretty nice. And now if we take a look, we can see we have these nice snow-covered branches all throughout the scene. And I'll just go ahead and do a quick render of that in our camera view so we can kind of see what that looks like. And this, like I said, this is more of a distant effect, but we'll see how this looks. Okay, and as you can see, this would be good for pretty much a distant tree, because you do have kind of a weird ghosting effect, which is being caused by that length size. But if we go in and edit our length down to 0 and click OK, and this time move it instead of changing the length in the plant editor, we might even have a little more control this way too. And we don't even need to move it up that much, just that tiny little bit, just for that nice amount of offset. And we'll go ahead and render that and see how that looks. And this will look a lot better for your close-ups then. We do have a little bit of weirdness where the snow is kind of the way it's intersecting over here. But overall, it looks like a very nice snowy tree. And we could save this and also add it to our scene. But we're mostly going to be using just those fir trees we made before. But it just shows pretty much the flexibility of this technique. And pretty much you can do it with almost any plant that you want to do, or a tree without leaves on it. That looks good. You could even do it with trees with leaves on it if you wanted to have kind of a neat effect. Or change the color so it's not even white, and you could have something else on the trees. You could make it orange if we had kind of an orange snow from some sort of a nuclear explosion from far away. But this looks pretty good, and you can use these, and it's pretty realistic as far as I'm concerned. And you could use this for the scene as well, and it will look pretty darn nice. So you can use it for just about anything in our snow scene. But I'm going to go ahead and save this anyway. So we're going to grab our two trees here, and we're going to group them together. We can click on our group 2 and call this tree 3, and now file and save object tree 3, which is already in here, but I'm going to do it tree snow underscore 03, save. And now we have our little preview here, and we can let that render, or we can just go ahead and click OK. Alright, so now we have all of our major objects done, and we can start putting our scene together.